What's up everyone, Michael here with another topic video. Today we're going to be talking about how Valve is finally ditching Greenlight, which is a few years overdate, I would say. Probably something that should have happened a very long time ago, but is finally happening now. The current Greenlight system is obviously terrible. It has a lot of problems. It's really abusable, which has actually led to Steam kind of being flooded with, I would say, malicious software. There's some games that just aren't good that get on there, and yes, they're legitimate games, and maybe they're not that great, and sure, they have a right to be on there, but there's obviously a lot of scamming sort of going on with games that are not games on there, and there's also asset flips and all those sort of things. Games that literally just sell themselves because they can make money off of selling trading cards. Now, they are going to be replacing it with a system called Steam Direct, which basically makes it so that you have to submit all of your company information, tax information, yada yada, just like before pretty much. However, it's going to be a little bit more strict, and it also has a straight up application fee. So if you want to get onto Steam, you're going to have a bare minimum for every game that you apply. Now, Greenlight already has a cost to it. It costs $100 to submit as many games as you want, but this new system would be every single game. And the cost isn't determined quite yet, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, the game in the background is Freedom Planet, a game that actually went through Greenlight, and very quickly, actually, but it is a absolutely fantastic game, and it never should have had to do a system like Greenlight to where it gets kind of voted on by the community, because it's a great game regardless. I don't care what anybody has to say about it. It does have some design flaws. Obviously, you know, no game is perfect, but it is an absolutely fantastic platformer, so if you like platformers, check it out. But regardless, let's go ahead and talk about Steam Direct in a little bit more depth. Now, there's kind of positives and negatives to it. Steam Direct is going to be a system where, you know, like I said, you apply your information and it has a straight up cost. Steam, aka Valve, has not actually kind of verified what that cost is going to be. They haven't decided yet. It is supposed to roll out later in spring. So back in spring, we'll probably, or in spring, we will know exactly how much it costs. But currently they are debating between $100 and $5,000. Some people are saying that it should be a little bit more, but at the same time, that's going to end up having a lot of negatives we'll talk about a little bit later. But let's talk about the positives right off the bat, because those are the parts that are really, really important to kind of look at, because no matter what ends up happening, this is going to be a better system than Greenlight for a number of reasons. Reason number one being the fact that Greenlight kind of allows a lot of bad games to get onto Steam and a lot of malicious games to get onto Steam because there's no sort of risk. There's $100 for the cost initially, and then these scammers are able to go on and put as many games as they want. And this is not necessarily a problem with Greenlight. It's more a problem with Valve's hands-off kind of solution to Greenlight, saying, hey, we don't want anything to do with it. It's all up to the community. And then the community, you know, doesn't actually take it into their own hands to say, no, we don't want this game, because quite frankly, there's no good games on Greenlight for the most part. There's a few notable titles that you'll definitely want to check out, but at the same time, most of it is garbage, which means a lot of people are not going to be checking it out. That means that these kind of scammy developers have been able to sort of cheat the system, and they use things like Steam trading cards to make the low cost and barrier to entry very much a profitable business. So they're able to kind of sell these trading cards or sell enough scam copies that they're able to refund their $100 and continue to do it periodically, which only puts up more clutter onto Steam. Now, with this new system, it's going to be costing them at least $100 per title that they want to put on Steam, which is going to eliminate that initial cost, or that initial cheap cost, and it's going to make that initial cheap cost actually fairly expensive, and it's going to continually get more expensive depending on how many titles they want to try and get on there, which means that the scamming sort of schemes that they have currently on Steam is going to be less, if not unprofitable, which is number one positive in my opinion. It is a system that should never have been kind of approved because it allows for so much abuse. Now, if you go on to ahead of that, it also comes with the positive that Valve is actually going to have to look at these from now on. They can't just go onto Greenlight and have an automated system that enables hundreds of games to go onto Steam right off the bat just because it's, oh, our clock ticked and this is what goes into our algorithms. They're actually going to have to verify that information. Instead of just verifying it once for the kind of submission to Greenlight in the first place, they're going to be able to look at it and be like, oh, well, this is going to be, you know, actually a good game because I actually had to look at it for this specific game. So maybe Valve is actually going to put in a little bit more effort on its curation. Now, maybe that's a little bit of hopeful thinking. Most people are thinking, no, they're not going to do that. They're just going to take the fee. But even if they end up taking the fee, there was that first positive as well. This also means that developers are able to actually have a release window for their game. In the current system that we have on Greenlight, you don't actually know when your game is going to release because it has to get verified first. and it has to be accepted through the Greenlight system before it actually ends up going on to Steam. Which means that basically you have a kind of upload date, and then you have an I don't know if it's actually going to be on Steam or not date, which is not very preferable, because then that means developers don't really know when to market their game. They're like, hey, we could end up marketing it now, but at the same time, what if our game doesn't get through Greenlight until like 2 months down the line? Then all of our funds for marketing are gone. And so this could actually be a way to actually reduce the cost of getting onto Steam by making it so that this marketing cost is actually more upfront. It'll be like, oh, well, it's going to cost this much to get onto Steam because we don't actually have to put in all this money to continuous marketing for Greenlight. And so it'll be, marketing for our release date on Steam rather than marketing for our release date on Greenlight, which is a much better way to do it in my opinion. Now, the other positive to this is also you're going to be able to say, my game will be on Steam rather than a game might be on Steam. The Greenlight system is obviously have a lot of negative kind of connotations, and if you say your game is on, Greenlight, that does not necessarily mean people are going to end up checking it out, because Greenlight has such a terrible reputation. So saying that your game is going to be on Greenlight doesn't actually help you, which is unfortunate. You can be like, my game's on Greenlight, but you're just like, yeah, well, everyone's game can be on Greenlight. Even this guy that's absolutely scamming people is on Greenlight. So who cares if you're on Greenlight? But if you can say, hey, I've actually got the verification from Valve, my game is going to be on Steam, that might actually help people quite a decent amount. It'll make it so that they'll look at it more seriously rather than more on the side of, oh, it's Greenlight, nobody cares about Greenlight, everything can get on Greenlight sort of system, which is going to definitely be a huge plus for developers. The other benefit is also the fact that this is going to be a more guaranteed system in general, to where, submitting a game isn't going to be a question of whether it will or not, but it'll also end up being a system to where once you're verified, you're going to be able to kind of look at it at a marketing standpoint and gauge beforehand whether that cost is going to be worth the investment. You're not going to go in and be like, oh, well, I'm going to spend this much on this and this much on this without kind of analyzing how much that's going to be. Now, this is not going to necessarily benefit developers as much as it's going to benefit the curation on Valve's part in general, because you're not going to go into it and be like, all right, well, my game isn't ready to show, let's say on early access, for example. Let's say there's a game that is not ready to show on early access. They're not going to be like looking at their product and be like, oh, this is going to sell for enough money. Like, let's say their entry fee is $1,000, which means they have to sell like 300, 500 copies or something like that. If they look at their product and they're like, all right, we're in early access and we really want that early access money to kind of fund the game, but we're not going to sell enough to even recoup that $100, they're not going to go through and put it on early access. They're going to wait, which is going to not only benefit, users that are buying into early access, but it's going to benefit developers as well, because what a lot of developers don't realize is that releasing your game too early is actually going to kill it. And we see a lot of products that don't get finished because the interest ends up dying before the game is even halfway done. And those are the sort of positives that I see. Now, obviously, some of those are sort of optimistic. I think that there's still definitely going to be scams that show up onto Steam, just like any other storefront. Any storefront that does not have hand-to-hand, curation is not going to have a system that is scam-free. Even the sort of PlayStation Network, which actually recently opened up their floodgates as well to early access titles, or let's say Xbox, which has had the indie titles for a very long time. Granted, they have it in a separate section, so you can kind of avoid it if you don't want to see those titles. But they've actually had a lot of terrible games on Xbox as well, using that system as well. And they've noticed that this isn't necessarily how we want to go, and they've pretty much gotten rid of the system entirely in newer sort of versions of Xbox Live, which is a good thing, in my opinion. But the negatives do come in kind of twofold. There is a trade-off to absolutely everything that goes into the system. Now, the first trade-off is that developers may actually have an extended cost. Now, my argument was that there was actually going to be a decrease in cost because you don't actually have to calculate funding for putting your game onto Greenlight, as in you're going to have one straight up cost and you don't have to continuously advertise for your Greenlight submission, being like, oh, we're on Greenlight, please vote for us. You don't have to pay for all that advertising. That's not something you actually have to calculate. It's going to be one straight up cost, and it's going to cost one consistent amount, which is also going to be a negative because maybe you don't have the funds to cover that. Maybe you're a game, like let's say Freedom Planet came out and it didn't actually have enough money to fund itself. Let's say it was a game that was like very low on its budget, and it's like, all right, well, we're already stretching the bounds. We can't actually afford this cost. How do we get our game onto Steam? Well, quite frankly, you don't. You have to find your funding somewhere else. And maybe there will be services that kind of go up into that. Maybe publishers will end up having another role again in that sort of system. But at the same time, you know, it does block out, let's say, those developers that fund for free. Like there was the game such as Unturned, I think it's called, that was made by a very young person, and they're not going to have $1,000 to submit into Steam. And so you're going to run into a situation where he wouldn't have that on Steam if it wasn't for the current Greenlight system. That said, that's going to be a benefit to some people, of course. They're going to be like, oh, well, if you can't do that, then maybe it doesn't deserve on Steam. But, you know, I obviously disagree with that. I think any game that is worth playing should be on Steam. And obviously not every game is going to be worthy of Steam, but at the same time, you're going to be able to kind of argue that maybe there's certain titles that maybe don't. Maybe that's something that should have been on itch.io or something like that, because there are other kind of output services available for that. So maybe they can end up getting their funding through that sort of system rather than having to solely rely on Valve for their funding, you know, to be able to get a game into the public's eye. That said, the other negative to it is also the fact that maybe this will end up making it so that a lot of games end up having difficulty getting on Steam, not because of the verification through maybe, you know, having the purchase rights, as in maybe the funds to actually pay for the fee, but maybe Valve will actually start cracking down on a lot of smaller indie games that maybe are worth being on Steam. Maybe they're not fantastic titles, but they still have like a sort of right to be sold. It might actually end up making it more difficult for those titles to get on as well. This also means that the sort of floodgates are not going to be as open because Valve is going to have to verify for each individual game, which means that there's also going to be a system to where maybe Steam doesn't get as many good titles right off the bat because it's going to have to sort of curate each title individually, and that means that it's going to take a longer period of time. Like, let's say Freedom Planet, for example, they submit their sort of submission, and it's like, yeah, this is a fantastic game, and it's totally going to get through. But Valve has to get through 500 million other titles first. And then that's going to end up slowing down the release window. That said, Valve will also be able to give the developer a release window, so maybe it won't affect it as much. But at the same time, it is sort of negative to it. But that's really the only negative I can see. You know, closing out the floodgates is definitely a good thing, in my opinion. And maybe you can think of some more negatives, obviously mention those in the comments, or maybe you can think of some more positives. Make sure to leave those in the comments as well. But anyways, this has been Michael with another topic video talking about how Valve is going to be removing the Greenlight system and replacing it finally, which is extremely overdue. This is a system that probably should have been implemented years ago. I don't even think that Greenlight should have been a thing initially. I thought it was a good idea at first. When I initially saw it, you know, it was like, oh, hey, this is going to be a great thing, but I don't think it was. I thought it was a huge mistake that Valve ended up making, and yes, it allowed some certain games to be on Steam, and it did allow a lot of kind of floodgate titles to end up going on Steam and allowed me to sort of discover them. Like, let's say Freedom Planet, for example. I never would have tried this game if I never would have saw it on Steam. Or maybe I would have, but it would have taken a longer period of time. Actually, no, I take that back. I definitely would have heard about it eventually. But at the same time, I wouldn't have found it when I did, because I initially found it on Steam, through its like discovery systems and things like that. And so, yeah, I mean, Valve just now has to take the sort of right approach with this. And what do you guys think? Do you think that this is the right approach? Do you think they should be taking something else? Do you think that they should just start curating games individually now and not even have an application fee? Like, I think before they actually did. And the other question we have is, we don't know if this is actually going to affect everyone. We don't know if AAA developers are going to have to submit to this fee or not. And hopefully they do, because, you know, I would rather have a system that's fair to everyone rather than a system that kind of discriminates against indies that would have to pay money in order to get their title onto Steam. But at the same time, maybe that's sort of Valve's sort of business strategy as well. Maybe AAA developers won't. But anyways, this has been Michael with the topic video talking about how Greenlight is no longer going to exist and is being replaced by a system called Steam Direct that sounds fairly promising, and I'm actually looking forward to its implications. And hopefully the new Freedom Planet 2 will be able to go through the system perfectly fine, because I would actually enjoy that quite a bit. I'm looking forward to the sequel to this game. And yeah, but anyways, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this one. You can also check out my Impressions review. My most recent Impressions review was for Mega Dimension Neptunia V2. I can't believe I just said Hyperdimension. I am failing at this boss just ridiculously. Anyways, Mega Dimension Neptunia 2, V2 is a kind of awesome JRPG. It's pseudo tactics and everything like that. I enjoy it quite a bit, so do make sure to check out the video if you like JRPGs, or maybe you like anime and you like video games and stuff like that. You should also check it out. Otherwise, you can also check out other type of videos that are now releasing on a daily basis, so you can end up checking out the most relevant news for the day and my opinions and thoughts on it, and maybe end up interacting with the community as well. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.